Hi everyone. In this video we'll be looking at a very interesting topic that is often ignored in low speed inviscid aerodynamics, which is called the boundary layers. So let's see what is a boundary layer. So far we have been dealing with inviscid flows. We have where we have neglected our viscosity to be um, sometimes in eta or sometimes nu to be zero, and but in actual reality this is not the case. In actual reality we'll have viscous flows, and our our nu, I'll adopt nu for this video. So nu would be will be a non-zero quantity, and as a result of which we'll have there is something called the no slip condition that happens, because no slip condition because uh, when you have, suppose this is a surface over which there is flow, this the flow that is very close to the surface, that is the flow is very, which is almost almost on the surface, will stick to the surface, and its velocity, its relative velocity with respect to the surface, with uh, with respect to the surface would be zero. That is quite intuitive, right? So that should happen when there is viscosity. It's kind of a friction that is pulling, and that is what is called the no slip condition. So this no slip condition creates a lot of other troubles here. So let's quickly look at what happens. So if you say that the relative velocity of the flow with respect to the surface, on the surface, let's assume this is the surface, this is a flat plate. Suppose flat plates are easier to analyze for boundary layers, so and that is the reason why we use flat plates for the analysis. So I assume, suppose the relative velocity is 0 here, but I have a free stream velocity that is going over here at speed of v infinity, that is the free stream velocity, but it is 0. So what must happen is that the flow here at 0 velocity must go to a higher velocity, that is v infinity. It can't go just drastically to higher velocity, so there will be a gradual increase, and that gradual increase will look somewhat like this. Let me write here. So it will look like this, and this will be the kind of velocity distribution that I can observe. I can see that this clearly has a velocity gradient, means the velocity, let me consider this to be my x and this to be my y. That means the velocity has velocity is varying along the y direction. It is 0 at the at the surface, and it is increasing gradually, and we assume that this is the place where my boundary layer velocity is almost 99%, or some conventions also state it is 95% times the free stream velocity. So that is where we consider it to be the end of this gradient, and that is also where we consider it to be the edge of the boundary layer. So this velocity is gradient is what constitutes the boundary layer, basically. So let me draw a quick figure here for better illustration. So I'll draw the bound flat plate again, and slightly tilted. I'm sorry for that. Um, yeah, so this is the flat plate. What happens is, if I have a uniform flow that is coming over here at some speed v infinity, then a velocity boundary layer will be created, which looks something like this. And this pressure, this velocity gradient keeps on increasing as we go far away from the upstream, as we go downstream. And also there is one more thing to be noted. So since we have a velocity gradient, and we can understand that there is something that is pulling the flow, or that is resisting the flow to move with the free stream velocity, and that can be interpreted as a shear stress on the surfaces, and that shear stress can has very has very important implications in our analysis of flows over boundary layer flows. So this is called the velocity boundary layer, and this has a boundary layer profile, which velocity profile, which looks like this. We call this as a profile, and we have a gradually increasing velocity which finally attains the free stream velocity. And there is one more advantage of constituting a subject called boundary layers, because outside the boundary layer we can consider the flow to be completely inviscid, and we can apply our normal inviscid Euler equations to solve the flow outside the boundary layer. And it is only inside the boundary layer, which has a very small thickness compared to the length of the object, suppose, which we consider here to be L maybe. So boundary layer thickness, which we call to be delta, which we call to be delta, and delta is very small compared to L. And you only need to solve the viscous flow equations on inside the boundary layer, and outside the boundary layer we can consider them to be inviscid, and it's fairly simple. And that's one major selling point for constituting a subject on boundary layers. And there is another kind of boundary layer called the temperature boundary layer, and we can see why this happens, because we just said that shear stress is responsible, or shear stresses are being created because of the velocity gradient, or it's vice versa, both things can happen. So because of shear stresses there will be heat generated, because it is kind of a friction always generates heat. And we'll have another kind of a boundary layer which is called the thermal boundary layer, which is usually larger than the velocity boundary layer, but it can be smaller than the velocity boundary layer also. We'll see under what conditions that happen. So sorry, this is the thermal boundary layer or the temperature boundary layer, and this also has a thickness which we define as delta T, and it also increases along the length of the plate. The thermal boundary layer profile looks something like this. It is at some value on the surface, and then it increases inside the velocity boundary layer. It increases to a maximum, and then it decreases gradually to some point which is not exactly the point it started on the surface, but some point which is greater than the point on the surface. So this is the kind of temperature profile that we'll observe in a thermal boundary layer. So, and we can from this figure we can see that there is one more insight. So we can see that delta is a function of x, and so is delta T function of x. X is nothing but it is along the boundary, along the length of the plate. So we considered this to be x and this to be y. That was our convention. They are not constants anyway. So, and so we can now, let's see, there is something called the Prandtl number, which determines which can be used to determine the relation or the comparison between delta and delta T, that is thickness of the velocity boundary layer and thickness of the temperature boundary layer. So it is generally stated that this is it, when the Prandtl number, which is denoted by PR, when this is that was a glitch. So when Prandtl number equals 1, we'll have delta equals delta T, and when Prandtl number is greater than 1, we'll have delta greater than delta T, and when Prandtl number is less than 1, we'll have delta less than delta T. In normal flow conditions that we usually observe, Prandtl number is almost somewhere around 0.7. So we usually have the velocity boundary layer to be smaller than the thermal boundary layer, but when we go to high speed hypersonic conditions, this might get reversed, and the thermal boundary layer will be swallowed inside the velocity boundary layer, and that might happen also. Yeah. So now that we have discussed that shear stress, let's put it into some more quantitative form. So we can write the wall shear stress denoted by tau w is nothing but nu times dou u by dou y. Where use the velocity along the plate, the x velocity calculated at the wall. That means we will calculate it at y equals 0, so that is at the wall, and this is nothing but the shear stress on the surface. Yeah, and similarly um, from the thermal boundary layer, we can say due to the thermal boundary layer there will be a heat transfer. So I can say my heat transfer rate of heat transfer, which is q dot calculated at the wall, can be minus kappa times, where kappa is constant, heat constant, dou t by dou y, where t is our temperature. We are taking the gradient along the y axis, calculated at the wall, which means calculated at y equals 0, and this is nothing but the heat transfer at the wall. This is a very important quantity that needs to be calculated when we go at hypersonics, because huge amount of heat would be generated at those kind of situations. And similar to delta and delta t, tau w is also a function of x, and so is the heat transfer, which is also a function of x, right? So now that we have looked at some quantitative representations of shear stress and heat transfer, we look at another interesting quantity, so which is called the displacement thickness. So there are two approaches to understand what is a displacement thickness. What is the displacement thickness? So I'll rather consider the intuitive one, because the other one is fairly difficult to understand. So the thing is, suppose consider I'll take the same flat plate example here again. Consider I have the flat plate like this. This is rather flat now, and I have my velocity boundary layer. I'll draw my velocity boundary layer like this. It looks somewhat like this, and okay, before I get to the velocity boundary layer, so before suppose assume that I initially I've assumed that it is an inviscid flow, means there are no boundary layers now, and the free stream flow is uniform, and which has a velocity v infinity. So the flow over the flat plate will also be the same, since the flow is inviscid and there are no boundary layers. Now assume that suddenly I take a viscous flow, and what happens is we'll start to get a boundary layer like this, a velocity boundary layer. Velocity is the boundary layer that is actually seen by the flow. The temperature boundary layer is not actually seen by the flow. It is just the properties across the thermal boundary layer that varies along the flow. So this is my boundary layer. What happens is, if I take the condition to be viscous, okay, let me change the color here so that the colors are properly labeled. So inviscid for white, and I take blue for viscous boundary, viscous case, viscous. Yeah. So what happens is, when we have a viscous flow, because a boundary layer is present, it is not this large, but it's slightly exaggerated for our understanding. So what happens is, the flow which was initially like this starts deflecting, gets deflected slightly like this. So this deflection from a usual flow that would be observed if we ignore the boundary layer, and to the flow where we have constructed the boundary layer and we have the boundary layer, this deflection is what we call as the displacement thickness. This is a fairly very intuitive definition. So let me directly give you the expression. The expression is nothing but it is represented by delta star, because delta is already used for the boundary layer thickness. So delta star is nothing but integral 0 to y1, the integral runs till y1, where y1 is nothing but y1 is greater than delta, and it runs till infinity, till means the till because we when in free stream it goes till infinity. So this is y, so we have to keep that in mind. This is y and this is x. So 1 minus rho, I'm sorry, this is an again glitch, yeah, 1 minus rho u by rho e ue, where rho e is the density at the edge of the boundary layer and u is the velocity at the edge of the boundary layer, which can be calculated using inviscid Navier-Stokes equations directly, because outside the boundary layer we can assume the flow to be inviscid. And rho and u um, are the density and velocity inside the boundary layer at any particular location x, so dy. So this is how the displacement thickness is defined as. Let me give you another quick pictorial representation of how the displacement thickness works. So assume I have a body like this, a conical body, maybe the nose of a aircraft or nose of the rocket. When it flows, it gets a boundary layer which looks something like this. Okay, dotted lines are not proper, but still, and this is what we define as the displacement thickness. So what happens is when flow comes, when flow tries to flow over this object, the actual object that it will see is not the white object. The actual object that it will see is this this blue object. So the flow will tend to behave with respect to the blue object and not with respect to the white object, and that is the effect of boundary layer. So now let's try to quickly go over the boundary layer equations, which can be derived easily from the Navier-Stokes equation, making a lot of assumptions. So these are some of the assumptions that we make. We assume the flow to be steady, which means there is no time variation of quantities, and the flow to be two-dimensional, just for the sake of simplicity. And we take our g force to be 0, which we usually do for all kinds of calculations. Gravitational force is 0 and the flow is incompressible, because we are not, this condition won't be true when we talk about supersonic or hypersonic or even transonic boundary layers. So let me write the momentum equation, x momentum equation, x momentum Navier-Stokes equation. So non-dimensionalized form, because that would be easier. We non-dimensionalize by using quantities, like for example, I non-dimensionalize my u by having a u prime which is stated as u by v infinity. I can take my x prime to be x by L, which is some characteristic length or length of the plate or flat plate that we are discussing, and similarly all other quantities can be non-dimensionalized. So I can write the non-dimensional form to be so this is the non-dimensional x momentum equation from Navier-Stokes. So now I will be making some assumptions, and we'll write the continuity equation here. So let me call this equation 1, that's very last. Okay, let me call this equation 1. So let us write the continuity equation, making some assumptions like the delta is very less than c, where c is some characteristic length that we have assumed, which is L in this case. My continuity equation will look like this. And if I just non-dimensionalize it, and now we'll be doing an analysis called order of magnitude analysis to determine the order of some different quantities. So it is nothing but, for example, I have a quantity, suppose I have a number called 2, I say this is of order 1, or any one digit number to be of order 1. For example, I have a number called 24, I say this is to be of order 10. Or if I have a very small number, some infinitesimal number, I say it is to be of order delta. And if something is very small, I'll say it is of order 0. So I denote order by a big O, and we'll do this analysis for these two equations to get some insights on our boundary layer equation. So we can see that we can see that my order of rho dash is rho prime is 0, sorry, my order, it is of order 1. My u prime is of also order 1, I'm assuming, because my u by v infinity, I'm scaling it in such a way that it is of order 1. That is my u prime. So my x prime is also of order 1. My y prime will be of order delta, because that is the boundary layer thickness that we have assumed. And again, our v prime, we don't know what is the order of v prime. Let us just have it as order of v prime. We need to find it out. So if we write this equation in terms of the order of magnitude equation, then we can write it as order of 1 times order of 1 by order of 1 plus order of 1 times order of v prime over order of delta, where keep in mind that v prime is a non-dimensional form of the velocity in the y direction. So this is 0 from the continuity equation. So now, to satisfy the order of magnitude equation, we need to have the order of v prime to also be the order of delta. That means I can just write it as delta, or I can also write it like this: v prime is nothing but of order of delta. So this is one result that we have got. We can say that the v prime, that is the vertical velocity, is not very large. And similarly, if I perform the same kind of analysis for our x momentum equation here, we'll get some insightful results. I'm going directly to the results here. I'll get something. The 1 by r infinity, Reynolds number infinity term, should be of order delta square to satisfy the order of magnitude equation. And we can see that this is a very important result. What we can infer from this is that the Reynolds number, free stream Reynolds number, is very large, because order of delta square is very small. So 1 by order Reynolds number should be a very small quantity. That means Reynolds number should be a very large quantity. So this is one insightful result that we have got, that the Reynolds number should be a very large number. Next, we will go to the y momentum equation, which can be written as follows. And if I non-dimensionalize it, I'll get something like this. Now if you write the order of magnitude analysis for this equation, which we can write very quickly as this will be of order of delta, and this term will also be of order of delta, which is minus 1 by gamma m infinity square, and we don't know what is the order of this term, dou p by dou y, which is the vertical pressure gradient, static pressure gradient, order of delta square times order of delta plus order of 1 by delta. So if we see that, if we assume that gamma m infinity square is of order 1, means the flow velocity is relatively small, and my Mach number is also small, then I can say that my dou p over dou y prime should also be of order delta or even smaller. So since this is very small, I can assume my dou p over dou y to be 0. This is a very good approximation for subsonic and even transonic flows. even in certain cases of supersonic flows. And this starts to fail, or this starts to get invalid only when we go to hypersonic regimes, where this assumption is no longer valid. The m infinity becomes very large and this assumption is no longer valid, and we might have significant pressure gradients in the vertical direction also. So this is one very insightful result that we have got from this analysis. Alright, so now that we have looked into the continuity, x momentum, y momentum equation, the other thing that is left is the energy equation, which I can quickly write as rho u So this is the energy equation. There is nothing much that we can analyze here. It's just more of implications, implementations. So this is all about the mathematical treatment of boundary layers, and we have derived not we've not derived we tried to do some analysis called the order of magnitude analysis on the boundary layer equations, which we got after assuming something from the Navier-Stokes equations, and we derived at some very insightful results, like the vertical pressure gradient is 0 inside the boundary layer, and the Reynolds number is very large to have a good boundary layer, etc. So now we'll look at some observations that illustrate the importance or the behavior of boundary layer. So what happens is, now that we have looked at how pressure gradients look and how velocity gradients look, let me consider three cases. I'll just copy this. This is first case, this is our second case, and this is my third case. Yeah. So what is for example, I have a boundary layer, and which normally looks like this, the velocity profile. I'm trying to draw the sketch the velocity profile here. This is nothing but bx over along x. Yeah, it is y bx over x. So this is my velocity profile for a normal boundary layer. So suppose I have a pressure gradient along the flow, which means I have a high pressure on this side, I have a low pressure on this side. Means the boundary layer, the flow is traveling from a high pressure region to a low pressure region. That means it is a favorable pressure gradient. It is supporting the flow. What happens is the boundary layer becomes like this. There is a more steeper gradient here. So let me draw the uh, streamlines or lines to indicate magnitude of the velocity. So we can see that the boundary layer becomes, the velocity profile becomes more steeper here. Boundary layer becomes thinner because the boundary layer is defined as the edge of the boundary layer is at 0.99 times the free stream velocity, which is attained quickly over here at a shorter distance. And suppose I have the next case, obviously you might have guessed, it is nothing but I have a low pressure region on this side and I have a high pressure region on this side. What happens is, this is not a favorable gradient, this is called an adverse pressure gradient. So because the flow is trying to move from a low pressure region to a high pressure region, so something different happens here. So what happens is, the free stream velocity inside the boundary layer decreases as it should, but it suddenly decreases and there is a reverse flow at the end. So if I try to sketch the velocity magnitudes, so I have a reverse flow here. So this is nothing but it's a reverse flow. Means very near to the surface, the flow starts moving in the reverse direction, which is due to this adverse pressure gradient. That means the flow is being pushed towards the other side against its flow direction due to this pressure gradient or due to this pressure difference. Reverse flow. Let's look at a situation where this happens actually. This happens actually in a lot of places, and this is a major reason for one one important phenomenon that we'll be looking at in a while. So assume I have a curved surface here. We can assume this to be the highest point of an airfoil also. Uh, so I'm taking 3 points, one here, one on the top highest point, the other on the symmetric to the first point. So if I try to sketch the velocity profile here, um, my blue one, represents the inviscid case, and that means what would be there if there were no boundary layers, and my green one represents the viscous case. This is the label. So I should have a velocity profile that looks something like this. It should be just uniform. And here, since it's a curved surface, the flow will accelerate, similar to what we observe in an airfoil. We'll have a higher velocity here, but it will still be uniform. And similarly, if this is symmetric, we'll have this same velocity as we had in our first point. So this is fairly reasonable for a inviscid case, right? So let's now look at what happens when we have a viscous case. So before we sketch the profile for a viscous case, um, let us see what is the state of pressure. So here I will have a high pressure, and here, since the flow is accelerating, I'll have a low pressure. And again, since here it is like the symmetric thing applies, and here it is, we will have a high pressure region. So now let's try to apply what we just saw in the previous slide to here, and let's try to sketch our velocity profiles. So what happens is, since this will be a normal velocity profile inside the boundary layer, um, it will look something like this, and this is the kind of flow and velocities in the boundary layer. And now we can see that the flow is now moving from high pressure to low pressure, so it is a favorable pressure gradient. It is supporting the flow, and I can that means I'll have a steeper boundary layer here, steeper velocity profile here, and I'll have a thinner boundary layer. So this is favorable, and this is how the boundary layer looks here, right? Now we can see that as the flow moves down from the low pressure region to the high pressure region, which is not a favorable pressure gradient, it is called the adverse pressure gradient, or it is an unfavorable pressure gradient. We'll observe that the velocity inside the boundary layer will decrease and it will become reversed here. So this will be the kind of velocity profile that we'll have at this point. So now there are a few more insights that we can get from this. So if you observe carefully, the velocity here, the flow here is moving towards the right, and the flow here, because of the reverse flow created, it will be moving towards the left or moving upwards. And this results, these two flows must meet somewhere, and that results in a stagnation point. And that results in a stagnation point. And if I try to sketch the velocity profile at this particular point, what I'll observe is something like this. The flow velocity becomes zero at the stagnation point. And if I try to sketch the streamlines of the flow, they look something like this. The flow is trying to curve towards the other side, because the top flow is a free stream, is having the free stream velocity. It is having a higher momentum along the downwards direction, and the reverse flow is having reverse flow cannot oppose it, so reverse flow must turn towards the other side, and there is a kind of circulation that is created here, and this region we call it as recirculation region. We call this as the recirculation region. And the important phenomenon that is observed here is, we call this point as the separation point. And from here the flow starts separating, and we'll observe a very important phenomenon that you might have guessed by now is called the flow separation. And it's a warning that we should not confuse flow separation with turbulent boundary layers. Turbulence is something different, flow separation is something different. Flow separation is completely laminar, and it should not be confused with turbulence, right? Yeah. So and that is, let me quickly get in. Alright, let's just skip. So if I try to sketch the same thing around a cylinder that is kept in a uniform flow, this is what I'll be observing. So suppose this is a cylinder, and I'm assuming there is viscous behavior. This is what I'll observe. So it is, I have my stagnation points here as usual, and what happens is flow moves like this, moves like this. I'll have my recirculation zones here like this, because of flow separation here. Because of the flow separation, it happens at this point, because here we can readily, this is a low pressure region and this is a high pressure region relatively, because everything that we are talking here is in relative terms. Because of this adverse pressure gradient, this flow separation will start happening. And let's look at an implication of the presence of boundary layer, or the consideration of viscous, and the mistake that we make when the mistake that happens when we assume the flow to be inviscid. So suppose I'll take two columns here. I have inviscid and I consider this to be viscous. So assume I have the same right circular cylinder here, and I have the same right circular cylinder here. If I consider this to be an inviscid flow, this is how the flow might look, should look like. There should not be any flow separation, because that happens only in case when a boundary layer exists. Boundary layer exists only when we assume viscous flow. The diagram is not exactly correct, but I hope you get the idea. So, but in a viscous flow, separation will happen, and the flow will look like this. There will be a recirculation zone here, which looks like this. Flow starts to separate from this point. Okay, these are the streamlines, right? But this is what actually happens, and when we try to calculate the pressure distributions on the right half and left half of the plane, we'll observe that there is a drag that is being produced. But when we try to do the same with respect in an inviscid case, we'll get the drag to be zero. This is also called the D'Alembert's paradox. We also calculated this analytically in our first video. Now if I try to analyze with an airfoil, which is a more realistic case and we use it everywhere. So I'll try to draw an airfoil here at an angle of attack. This is a cusp airfoil, just for sake of illustrating the concept, I've assumed the cusp airfoil. So if I, in an inviscid case, because I will not have a flow separation in the absence of a boundary layer, the flow must go over like this. So it must, I'll have my other stagnation point here. Yeah, so these are my two stagnation points, and if I observe here, if I observe closely at this at the trailing edge, I can see that the flow is turning, which means there is a high adverse pressure gradient here. But because we are assuming it to be inviscid, the flow cannot separate from the body, and it needs to turn and go again. This cannot happen, and this does not happen in reality also. And we've already illustrated this case in our first video, and we'll look at what specifies this condition exactly. Let me quickly draw the airfoil here. This is part of the airfoil. Yeah, the airfoil is completely assembled. Okay. Um, and if I assume a viscous flow, then what happens is, this is the flow over the top of the airfoil, and when the flow comes over here, oops, I'm sorry for that. Oh, sorry that was a technical glitch. Yeah. So this is the stagnation point. Flow goes over the top, it will come as usual. When the flow comes over the bottom, here it will see an adverse pressure gradient between near the trailing edge on the top and bottom of the surface, because this is a high pressure region and this is a low pressure region. But the flow will not turn, because when we consider a viscous case and we have an adverse pressure gradient, then flow separation occurs and the flow just goes like this. The flow will get separated from the body and it will just go like this. And this is precisely stated by what we call the Kutta condition that we discussed in our first video, which states that the flow should leave the trailing edge smoothly to avoid conditions like this. And that's a very important example of considering the boundary layer and implication of viscous flows. And next concept that we should look at is the variation of stagnation pressure and the kind of vorticity or circulation inside the boundary layer. So from our order of magnitude analysis, we have derived a result which states that the vertical pressure gradient of the static pressure is 0, which means the static pressure is only a function of x, that is, it varies only along the flat plate or along whatever. But we know that the stagnation pressure is given as, or which is also called the total pressure. It is nothing but T static plus half rho u square. And if I just consider the same flat plate case again here, and if I draw the boundary layer which looks like this, and if I draw the velocity profile here, it looks like this. Yeah, so I can see that in each layer of the flow inside the boundary layer, the u is different, and the u is 0 at the surface of the flat plate, and it is almost equal to is 99% decreasing velocity at the edge of the boundary layer. And hence, even though the static pressure remains a constant in the vertical direction, the stagnation pressure varies because of its dependency on the flow velocity, which is u square. And we can find out this variation by finding out the function for u and then taking a derivative with respect to y and so on. I'm not getting into the mathematical part here. And similarly, since there exists a pressure gradient here, we can say that the curl of velocity is non-zero, because we'll have a term which has dou u by dou y, which is the dou v by dou y, which is the vertical pressure gradient, which will be non-zero. And I can say that from these two equations, I can say that my vorticity, which is xi, is non-zero, and so is the circulation, which is given by surface integral of del cross v dot ds along any enclosed surface ds, also non-zero. I can also write the circulation to be line integral along a closed contour given by u dot dl, which is also non-zero. So I can take the contour which probably looks like this, this blue contour, and I can integrate it, and I can show that this is a finite value and it's not 0. Alright, there is a concept called laminar boundary layer transition, laminar turbulent boundary layer transition. What happens is, let me get a picture. So this is the picture of an incense stick. This is a shadow graph image of an incense stick, where shadow graph is a technique for capturing flows. So incense stick, we can clearly observe, we would have observed this in our homes also. We can observe that the flow is initially laminar in this part, and as it moves up, it becomes turbulent. The primary reason is the change of Reynolds number. And the same thing happens with the boundary layer also. So I try to keep this aside and get another image here. We can see that boundary layer also will become laminar. For example, I consider a very long plate, so the laminar nature exists only till a certain extent, beyond which the Reynolds numbers will become very large, and we'll have the turbulent boundary layer created, and the flow inside the turbulent boundary layer is fairly very complicated to analyze using primitive expressions that we have derived. That is beyond the scope of this video, and there are some things that, some small insights that I would like to give. We can say that even from the figure we can say that the thickness of laminar boundary layer is less than the thickness of the turbulent boundary layer. This means the turbulent boundary layer is thicker, and also the delta T for a laminar boundary layer, that is the thickness of the thermal boundary layer, is also less than the thermal boundary layer in a turbulent condition. This implies that this has a lot of implications on heat transfer and the shear stress conditions in a laminar and turbulent boundary layer. And the transitions can happen due to various reasons. For example, it can be due to an excess roughness in the plate, or it can be due to some induced oscillations. There is also a concept called oscillations in boundary layer, which is fairly small in a laminar boundary layer, and as the boundary layer thickness grows, these oscillations also grow, and when they become sufficiently large, the boundary layer starts to become turbulent, and that is how we observe turbulent laminar boundary layer to turbulent transition. And next thing would be discussing the measurement of how properties in a boundary layer are measured. So usually the simplest way would be to use a pitot static tube to measure the pressure, and also the stagnation pressure from that. So this is a picture from NASA's website, which shows pressure tubes. We have a series of pressures. We can see that we have a series of pressure tubes here, which are directly connected to a transducer. Transducer is nothing. It is like a digital manometer which measures the pressure, or which measures the difference in pressure inside the pressure tube. And this is how it is mounted inside a tunnel wall. And they use these kinds of pressure tubes to measure the static pressures and stagnation pressures inside the boundary layer. And there is another kind of experiment. This is taken from Measurements Lab YouTube channel. So this is a picture of a setup that they have used. This is a flat plate setup where they have attached lot of small pressure tubes. These are pressure tubes. You can see that one of them is longer. There are totally 9 tubes, and one of them is longer. The other 8 are smaller compared to the first one. So, and we have tubes running. We have plastic tubes running from each of these pressure ports, and these plastic tubes are connected to a manometer. So they look something like this. So these 8 or 9 pressure tubes are connected to these manometers, and these manometers measure the pressure and during the experiment. And this among these 9 pressure tubes, we have this one pressure tube is the static pressure tube. The other 8 are stagnation pressure tubes, and that is how we measure the stagnation pressure and static pressure in a boundary layer. And similarly, we can from these measurements we can find out what is the flow velocity inside the boundary layer. From especially from this kind of a setup, we can find out what is the flow velocity at each stage of the boundary layer, at each layer of the boundary layer, and we can find out when the flow velocity becomes almost 95% or 99% of the free stream velocity, we can say that is the edge of the boundary layer, and hence we can calculate the thickness of the boundary layer from that value. So that's all with respect to the measurements in boundary layer and the analysis of boundary layers. So and before we end this video, I'd like to give you a very interesting demonstration of a futuristic concept. Since we have talked about flow separation, and we know that flow separation is not that really good a phenomenon, because at relatively high angles of attack, this flow separation can cause stalling of the airfoil, and stalling can cause disastrous effects on the plane. So this is a demonstration of a concept called plasma actuators, which can be used to make something magical. So then let's quickly go through the video. So we can see that presently the plasma actuator is off, and when suddenly it is turned on, the flow becomes completely laminar around the airfoil. When it is off, we can see there is flow separation. We can see the wakes, we can see the reverse flow, the circulation region, everything. And when plasma actuator is on, we can see the flow becomes completely laminar, and this is simply magical. And this might probably a future prospect of study for all of us. Thank you for listening patiently, and have a great day.